Hello, everybody, and welcome to CAI Southeast Florida's 2023 Florida Legislative Session with our FLA Committee. My name is Nicole Salcedo, and I'm the Chapter Executive Director. With us today, we have Ms. Lisa McGill, FLA Delegate and Legal Counsel with Kay Bender and Ron Baum, Jason Schoenholz, Chapter Board Member, Manager Member, and FLA Delegate, Michael Corman, Board Member, Homeowner Leader, FLA Delegate, and Mr. Travis Moore, our Florida lobbyist. With that being said, FLA Committee, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. As we Nicole just introduced us, so we're just here today to talk about the 2023 Florida Legislative Session and what we do as FLA. So Travis, as you already introduced, is the lobbyist for CAI and has been performing in this position since 2009. We couldn't do anything that we do without him. Michael, Jason, and I are all delegates from the Southeast Florida chapter. So we are happy for you to be with us today. What we're going to talk about today is how CAI FLA works and some of the activities that we do through the year. We're going to go through a summary of our 2023 session priorities, and then we're going to go into the actual bills that pass that you need to pay attention to. But finally, we're going to close with how you can become a CAI advocate so that you can participate and communicate with your legislators and otherwise influence the legislation that affects you, whether you're a community association manager in your day-to-day professional life, if you're a community board leader, for how it's going to impact you and your residents as far as your operations are concerned. And of course, if you live in a community association, how these laws are going to impact you and your rights and responsibilities. So first, I think we're going to talk about the summary. So Michael, can you give us a description of like what we did this year?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. So welcome, everybody. So during this 2023 legislative session, there were 27 bills that the FLA team tracked and addressed throughout the whole process. The team, to give a composition of what they look like, there were 4 bills of the 27 that the team supported. There were 4 that we opposed. 12 we were neutral, we had a neutral position on those bills, and we have 7 that we're monitoring. CAI team identified 9 bills of the top 27 that were classified as top priority or high importance legislative items. 4 of the 27 bills tracked by FLA were passed by the legislature and approved by the governor of this session. And you'll learn a little bit more in detail about that as we move forward through this discussion. Lisa, can you go to the next slide? This is the detail of what the 27, if we were to plot them out across the board, you can see the 9 top priority, high importance legislative items are highlighted in yellow. You can also see which bills we supported, which bills we opposed, which ones were neutral on, and which ones we're monitoring. So it's just a good dashboard to get a sense of what the landscape looked like this session and what the discussions look like of the different bills that were reviewed during this process. Lisa, I'll turn it back over to you and Travis to walk through the details on the ones we want.
Thank you, Michael. Lisa, if I could just mention just one thing, just by way of example, because this is a really good kind of a visual. So the process is very fluid and flexible. And so that's why your delegates, and thank you, Southeast Chapter, for sending such really, really great delegates. The 3 that we have here today have just been such an asset as we look at all these different bills. And they have to meet every week. And oftentimes there's a lot of texts and emails that are going on as things are moving through the process. And I'll just use as one example that House Bill 437 that we're going to talk about a little bit more in a deeper dive, but in that neutral category, you'll see there it started off as a homeowner's right to display flags. And that was a bill that we were just, for lack of a better term, neutral, kind of just didn't have it, weren't opposing it, weren't supporting it. It was there. We were keeping an eye on it. And then all of a sudden, late in the session, it changed was amended and became, and again, we'll talk about this, but as it passed, it was a homeowner's right to display flags and store property, and also dealt with artificial turf. So all of a sudden, as you can see, that becomes something quite different, where we had to get in and really work on that. And then it kind of moves categories then from a neutral to an oppose kind of a position. And then if we can get it right, it goes to support. If not, so it's that kind of thing. So thanks, Michael, for helping kind of put this together. And I just wanted to, oftentimes nothing stays in one bucket. It can move along as the process develops.
A lot of times people ask, well, how do we decide, what our priorities are? How do we decide what bills to monitor? Of course, we rely upon Travis, very, very heavily, because he knows, or he's got a better idea and a feeling as to what bills really are going to gain some traction. And also, as far as the members of the group, we can, of course, evaluate how influential those bills will be to our operations. You'll see that some are in this neutral category, and really the neutral category is if it's not going to substantially impact the association operations or association rights. So we have both there on vacation rentals, and you may think, well, vacation rentals, of course that impacts association operations or your rights as a homeowner, but both of those bills contained caveats or exemptions for community association covenants. So that's why we were neutral with respect to those bills. However, we do need to monitor them because something could change, and there could be modifications that could adversely impact, what we do for community associations. So the first bill that we're going to talk about as far with any substance, and I neglected to mention that the Q&A is open. So please put your questions into the Q&A if you can. We'll try to look at them contemporaneously. If we don't see your question at the time we're discussing something that it's relevant to, then we'll try to circle back to it later in the presentation. So, but the first thing we wanted to talk about is the SB 360, which is the construction defect bill. And it's labeled a construction defect bill. I label it as a constructed defect bill, but it really is a change to the statute of limitations to bring construction defect claims. So the statute of limitations for a construction defect claim is 4 years. That hasn't changed, but what did change is how you measure the 4 years. So in the past, you measured the 4 years. The triggering date was at the date of certificate of occupancy or completion or actual possession, but it was the later date of those events as opposed to the earliest date. Now, it changes the triggering date from the earliest of, whether it's a CO or a temporary CO or the certificate of completion, abandonment of construction. So that obviously changes when you need to bring your claim. In addition to the statute of limitations, there's a statute of repose, and the statute of repose is for latent defects that are not readily observable. So after you turn over your community from developer control, you'll typically have an engineer come and complete a survey of the physical improvements to determine whether or not they are compliant with code or they're compliant with your specifications, the plans and specifications for the community, and just according to good construction practices. Well, there are things that you can't see, and even an engineer cannot see, and those are latent defects. So the statute of limitations has, the statute of repose is that drop dead date to bring these latent claims. And that was in the past 15 years, it went down to 10 years, and now it's even shortened down to 7 years. So I know that, Jason, when you're involved in new transition communities, how do you handle the physical improvements, and how you go about making sure that the owners actually get what they are entitled to receive?
Yeah, Lisa, this is a big deal. I know we're not happy with the changes that came into the construction defect bill, because we see the implications where a developer can really stall the turnover process and make it even harder for the homeowners to get what they intended to purchase. So I know this is one of the things that that when FLAW meets later this or next month is going to be one of our priorities for next year, because it is a concern. The statute keeps getting shorter and shorter, and it's not an easy process, and it's a big concern for a lot of our homeowners out there.
Yeah, I know this is a high priority for us to next session because we really do want to preserve those rights, particularly for homeowners associations where there is no tolling period for the statute of limitations. Next bill that we wanted to talk about is the one that that Travis mentioned earlier. And originally we were neutral on this bill because it was just about flying flags, and you could fly an additional flag. The additional flag could be first responder flags, so law enforcement, firefighters, nurses, other types of official first responder flags for the state of Florida. But the bill changed, and it changed to allow parcel owners and homeowners associations to install or display items in the backyard, so long as they're not visible from the frontage or an adjacent parcel. So this is something that, and I included a picture. Obviously, the junk that's in the backyard of this particular home is visible from the neighbor, but if they had a tall fence, a tall privacy fence, or a tall hedge or what have you, those items would not be visible from the adjacent home, and more likely than not visible from the front of the home. Travis, you want to talk about like how this came about and
yeah, and I was trying to answer somebody in one of the chat questions, but so I lost my screen. But anyway, hopefully, can you hear me, see me, all that?
Yeah.
Hear you and see you
Okay.
perfectly.
All right, good, because I can't see you now because the other stuff's up on the screen. So yeah, this is just a classic example of kind of how the process works or doesn't work, depending on your perspective. So again, a bill was filed dealing with flags. Essentially, it was to expand what types of flags can be flown in a community without the association being able to just deny it outright. Last year, we had worked with the legislature to open it up to allow for the flying of the Space Force flag, because we needed to add that to all of the other armed forces now that we have the Space Force. So again, we work on these issues. This bill came up. We were monitoring it closely. It was going to open it up for first responder flags. Typically, we are cautious about this, and as everyone knows that works and lives in communities, flags have kind of become the new political signage. So, we're trying to create harmony. So there becomes an issue of, where to kind of draw the line. But this was basically the bill was going to just say, you now can pick one of two. And here's the list of two. And they were adding to that, these first responder flags. And it was kind of funny because one of them was that was going to be added was for the 911 operators. And I happened to be sitting in committee next to the lobbyist for the 911 operators. And he looked at me and he said, what are they doing? We don't even have a flag. And I said, well, you better go. You might want to create one. You could sell it. But anyway, then all of a sudden we noticed that this bill changed, and there was language out there that got filed that said, that an association also can't say no if you wanted to store stuff, as long as it couldn't be seen by the adjacent parcel. Didn't define parcel, didn't kind of take into an account, golf courses, maybe a lake, a preserve where you could still see across the way. And it had this artificial turf thing in there that was a little weird. So I went to the sponsor and I said, well, what's the story with this? Maybe we can work on this with you, educate again how common interest ownership works and how you agree to a set of rules, et cetera, that we all know. They said, well, there's a community that we have in our district, said this representative. It's a high-end community. that there's a person there that wanted to put in artificial turf. His association said no. He said, well, I'm going to do it anyway, put it in. It backs up onto the water. He said nobody can see it from the front, but somebody coming along the waterway, saw it in the back, was concerned about the fact that he was still, fertilizing bushes and other things. And the water now was just running, there's no grass to stop. It was just running right into the body of water. So said, turned him in, kind of a thing, to the association. So he then went to his legislator, who he'd contributed to, and said, I want you to fix this. And the legislator said, oh yeah, we people should be able to do what they want in their own with their own property. Not taking into account, even the environmental hazards of stuff going into the water and all of that. Just, you should be able to do what you want in your own community. So again, I explained, well, you sign and agree to rules and regulations, you give up a little bit of your rights so that for the betterment of the community, all the stuff that you guys all know and quote every day. So the person said, well, you need to go, work in the house. So I went over, long story short, I said, look, we can fix this problem dealing with artificial turf. So again, with our great FLA delegates, we went to an attorney that's part of our delegate that's in that area of the state. I said, I need you to draft me some language. The group gets together, language is drafted. I take it to the member, and it literally, it almost was just for that yard. It was that specific, but it just dealt with the artificial turf issue. And the legislators working on this decided no. Again, the issue is the legislature tries to do things very narrow, and that's wrong. This is the more broad issue is you should be able to do whatever you want on your own property, and we don't want to make this just about the artificial turf. This is about doing whatever. So that's why we ended up with the language. It's because of that artificial turf issue that you see in there. But we ended up with the language that I think is really absolutely going to need to be addressed, because it deals with parcels. It says it doesn't say a boat or ARV. It just says, you could have a whole marina of things, I guess, if nobody could see it. And that's, obviously a problem, and just kind of anti how common interest ownership works. So this is going to be one of those issues that we're going to need to go and certainly be revisiting to just make it, to either repeal it or make it just work better when we deal with, again, if you're on a golf course and I can see across the way, I'm not an adjacent parcel, which is what the law says, but I can still see stuff over there. Is that, or again, a pond, whatever. So that's something we'll work on. So hopefully that helped a little bit. And I'm going to try to figure out how to get this back so I can see.
Yeah, lots of people outside of the community association world, sometimes they'll ask me, well, who cares? Who cares what's in somebody's backyard? Especially if you can't see it. And many HOAs have architectural control restrictions that even apply to the landscaping themselves. So when changing any of the planting beds or trees or however you're going to do your landscape, it all goes before the architectural control board. So there's, I guess, a little bit of a disconnect between architectural control requirements and, of course, the individual rights of the individual homeowners. And we see this all the time. So the big play structures and what have you, and sheds. So this is definitely an issue that could create a lot of strife and actually a lot of adversarial proceedings, litigation or going through the pre-suit mediation provisions. And, one of the jobs that we try to undertake from FLA is to, when we're monitoring legislation, is to try to avoid future dispute. So I think one of the big objections to this law, as far as our group was concerned, was, hey, why do we want to now create brand new fights when we didn't have those fights before? So it remains to be seen what concessions can be made in order to make it more palatable for the community associations involved. Now, here, HB 919, Homeowners Association's Bill of Rights, this one made a lot of changes, but it's very significantly different from when it started. What were the changes that were made? I'll go over what the bill actually says now, but can you tell us like how this came about and where how we address it during the session, basically? Travis, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was answering a question here. Okay. We'll figure out how to do that later. So 919, and we when we talk about this all over the state, not many people are nearly as aware of this as this chapter is, because this is in your backyard. So you guys have all heard of the hammocks and the issue with that association, one of the largest associations in the state, one of the largest really in the country. And it was just being very fraudulently operated in a lot of ways. Representative Porras, who was used to be an aide, was running for an open house seat. A member that represented that area had been left early to be elected and was elected last year to the Miami-Dade County Commission. So this seat opens up and Representative Porras runs, and the hammocks is so big, it represents literally 2/3 of that House district. So his entire campaign, obviously rightly so, was about just cleaning up that mess. But it became very, more broad, very much broad reaching and overreaching in a lot of areas. But he filed, and we met with him beforehand and worked with him, but he filed this bill. And then actually before he was elected in September, these folks were arrested that were running that association and charged with significant crimes, financial crimes, embezzlement, and other things. They will go to trial. They will end up, probably go. I mean, very, very likely could be convicted, go to jail, pay fines, etc. We looked at that as, the law worked. I mean, if you're going to do these kinds of things, these are criminal activities, no matter where you're doing them. But he filed this bill, and initially it was this 60-page bill that dealt with, condos, co-ops, and HOAs, dealt with, not having the oversight really with DBPR, putting the oversight with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, making everything criminal penalties if the secretary didn't respond to a records request in the allotted amount of time, that she's going to be charged with an actual crime, a felony, a misdemeanor. There was just subpoena power. There were all kinds of things. We said, obviously, there are some issues that need to be addressed. Let's try to address them without being extremely disruptive to community associations. Things dealing with liens and how liens work. And we said, if you can't lien for a fine, and let's just say you're doing Airbnb and you're renting your place out for, $1,000 a week, and you're told, okay, you're going to get hit with a $100 fine, you're just going to pay it and keep moving on. I mean, that's just going to be a neighborhood occupational tax. So there's got to be some, ability for an association to enforce their rules, all of the things, again, that you guys live and work with. The bill ended up being very different in the House than in the Senate all the way through the process. Those things dealing with criminal penalties, things dealing with the lien issue I just talked about were not in the Senate bill. They were in the House bill. We ended up, the Senate bill passed over to the House, and the member was going to, not take it. And the bill, I think at that point would have ultimately died. However, there's language when you read this bill dealing with construction issues that do not really relate to the hammock issue. And that issue came from a very powerful leadership position in the House, where a very powerful leader was dealing with a community in North Florida, where at his community, he was putting in a pool. he was told, okay, we need a $5,000 deposit, $4,000 from the contractor, the pool company, $1,000 from you. We're going to need to hire an architect to review these plans. And then the money is to make sure that you don't, rip up, and not replace the yards on either side of you or the street as you're dealing with the construction on this thing and the drainage, making sure all of it's up to, you're doing it according to your plan that we've approved, all of that. And then what'll happen is if that's all done timely, then you get your $1,000 back, but the $4,000 opposite of that. 4,000, if that's all done right, then the construction company gets their $4,000 back, but your $1,000 you do not get back. So this legislator said, well, that doesn't sound like a deposit. That sounds like a fee. So, I want to fix that. And I said, well, again, here are the documents. Looked, from his management company. These are the documents you signed. You see here, this is your signature. You approved to abide by these rules. Doesn't matter. We're going to fix that. And I said, okay. So I said, I can work on language again that fixes the pool issue. He said, no, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it and just fix it in a bill. And I said, oh, okay. What bill? And he said, this bill. And 919 became the bill that he wanted to put it on. So all of a sudden, by way of the process, that bill got legs and became a bill that we weren't just going to be able to, quote unquote, and I use this in a nice way, but kind of kill in the Senate. This was going to now become a bill that we needed to make sure that was going to go. And so when that Senate bill came over, even though the House member was like, I'm not taking this, this is not what I wanted. He kind of got tapped by, leadership and said, yeah, but there's language in that bill that we want. So the bill then passed, went to the governor, was signed last week. So that may be a lot more information than you want, but again, that's how this stuff all ends up happening. And that's why we are with the bill. When you look at the bill and you see this construction language in there, that's what it's from.
I think it's important though, Travis, you're talking about the process, right? And that's
right.
Kind of what we wanted to talk about a little bit today too. You glossed over it a little bit, but when this bill was first put out there, it was extreme. I mean, it had a tremendous amount of stuff in there that was, as you said, overreaching. And I think it's important to point out that part of what FLAW does, which is great. There's 20 of us delegates from different backgrounds, from me being a manager to Lisa being an attorney, Michael being a homeowner, lots of reserve people, everybody that touches this. And you had somebody whose whole campaign was based on, I'm going to clean this up. And finally, with the work that you do, and maybe a little help of us sitting with him for 10 minutes and all of those things, to be able to move this bill a little bit off of where it was, right? I think it went from, was it something like 84 pages down to 19? Yep. I mean, we're not 100% happy with what's in here. You're absolutely right. But I think it's a lot more livable than had this kind of a body not existed to kind of step in and help right the ship a little bit, or direct things a little better than where they were.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions. Well, we had a question that was related directly to this particular bill, and they asked what disclosures need to be made by the director. So the disclosures are very similar to disclosures that are required by the Not-for-Profit Corporate Act or that are required in the Condo Act. And directors and officers, regardless of whether they're elected or appointed by the association, or whether they're directors appointed by the developer, they must disclose any activity that may be reasonably construed to be a conflict of interest. So directors and officers must disclose any activity that may be reasonably construed to be a conflict at least 14 days prior to voting on the issue, or entering into a contract that is the subject of the conflict. And there's a rebuttable presumption that the conflict exists if any of the following occur without disclosure. So if a director or an officer is a relative, of a director officer enters into a contract for goods and services with the association. So if you're a director and you have any member of your family is financially interested in the contractor that's proposing to perform services, and or the director, officer, or a relative holds an interest in the corporation or other business entity with it, which the association desires to do business. Travis, I saw you wanted to say something.
I did.
Yeah. On the
No. I
disclosure.
just was doing that because you were answering it live.
Oh, okay. And then I saw two questions on here that I'm not familiar with, because a couple of you have raised a point about registering as housing for older persons. That's the 55 and over. And they were saying that it goes from 5 years down to 2 years. Now, my recollection, and I haven't really dealt with this for a while, is that the Florida Commission on Human Relations did want those disclosures updated every 2 years. And that's really the survey of all your members so that you can prove that you have at least 80% of the occupied residences occupied by someone who's 55 and older. So that's something that I'll need to take a look at, because I wasn't aware that there was a change or that the Florida Commission was really going to be enforcing that. But as far as the financial, I wanted to say, like, if any director is charged, it's not if you're convicted, but if you're charged with one of the following crimes, you're off the board. So that's forgery of a ballot envelope or voting certificate used in an HOA election, theft or embezzlement involving the association's funds, destruction of or refusal to allow the inspection of the official records, really pertaining to the election records, but this says any of the association's official records, and obstruction of justice is provided in Chapter 843. So that's a pretty harsh remedy that's now available to our HOA members, as is the potential for criminal penalties for voter fraud or engaging in voter fraud, or encouraging or requiring people to change their votes due to harassment or bribes or threats and what have you.
And one thing I wanted to mention, just at the very first bullet under notice of board meetings must include agenda. That's really, I think, the thing that most folks here at HOA world need to pay attention to with this bill, because the rest of it, again, I don't think you're going to be involved in these kinds of crimes. I would hope not. So a lot of that, if you're operating the way you're supposed to be operating, I think you're going to be fine. The change, though, for everyone that you really do need to pay attention to is with HOAs, unlike condos, you only have to just put out and we've all seen it, where you pull into a community and they've got the sign that's like that a realtor would use or whatever, that's just kind of put there that says meeting tonight, 7:30, clubhouse. And that's the notice, just that you're having a meeting. Well, now that's not enough. You're going to need to provide an agenda. Doesn't have to be, incredibly detailed and specific and all that, but you have to have an agenda that is you're having a meeting and here's the agenda. I think, and maybe this is, managers like, Jason and Michael and others, might differ on this, but I mean, I think the best thing might be just to, get one of those plastic boxes that you see, that a realtor would use to put the flyer for the house, the listing copy, and details of the house, that's inside that with the flap over it so it doesn't get wet. You might even just put, want to put that on the notice sign. So you've got the agenda, or certainly the bulletin board. There's other ways, but you now have to have something other than just we're having a meeting Tuesday at 7. It now has to have an agenda. It's probably going to launch on me.
That one's not a bad change. I mean, it takes it closer to the condo world and the co-op world, and that's been a long-standing, trying to streamline them, the three, so that they're very similar.
We try to get them as close to the same as we can. Yeah. Okay.
But also with this bill about the fining notice, and I've told my clients that it needs to be this way just for clarity's sake. So the notice of the notice of the hearing before the committee, you have to disclose what is the violation and what does the homeowner or tenant or occupant need to do to cure the violation. So if they know what the violation is, or the violation alleged, and know what to do to cure it, you'll be more likely for the homeowner, so long as they do not object to everything that you're saying, to actually get the relief that you really want, which is the violation to be cured. You want people to not violate. And then after the hearing, also you tell them, hey, the committee met on Tuesday the 6th and voted to approve the fine or the suspension that was already imposed by the board of directors. Here's the amount of the fine. Here's what you need to do in order to cure the fine. I don't know if you have any issues with fines in your community. I know, Michael, you're the president of a condo association, but fines, it's a very, it's not necessarily a very effective remedy, because you can go through the whole fining process and the violation can still be there. So you really want to tailor your enforcement mechanisms to what is going to be most closely aligned with the actual result that you want in the end.
Yeah, and I'd say, Lisa, you're right. It's about the behavior. You want the behavior, you don't want the money when it comes down to fines, but we need the tools. So when there's discussion up in Tallahassee that we want to eliminate the ability for association to fine, that becomes a concern. Because at some point you have to do those kinds of things in order to get the behavior that you seek, to get them to align with the documents that they agreed to live by when they chose to live in the community.
Thank you. So now we're going to talk about the big to do, and that was Senate Bill 154. And this is, everyone calls it the glitch bill, but really went over some of the ambiguities and inconsistencies that was in 4D from the last year's special session. And that talks about primarily the milestone inspections and the required reserves, or the structural integrity reserve studies. There was somebody that raised a question or made a comment about a bill that was recently filed on the federal level. And that's true. So Debbie Washman Schultz filed or refiled one of the bills that was filed last year that she authored, and her and Representative Chris, both from Florida, authored, to create financing or mechanisms for community associations or community association members that are facing substantial costs as a result of infrastructure improvement, or making the building safe. So I forget what the names of the bills last year. It was safer, so safer in condos, but one of which would open up the program that's available for loans for mitigation type loans or improvement type loans to individual homeowners that are facing assessments for structural repairs. Another one of the bills was last year was designed to enable building departments to have additional funds to implement and enforce these requirements. And I know that our Florida legislators are very, very seriously looking at how to open up the whole financing options for both the associations that have to fund these large projects, if there are large projects, or to fund catch-up reserves if they haven't been funding reserves, or to give homeowners the ability to have access to funds so that they can pay their assessments on a timely basis. We went through SB 154 every week, every day for several weeks, months. So I think a lot of the changes were really beneficial to us as far as the clarity as to what your requirements are. And we're going to go through some of them some of the actual detail real quickly, unless anybody else wants to chime in before we start talking about the actual details.
Go through the details. I mean, there's some summary stuff we can wrap up, but I think these were good changes for overall good changes for this bill so that we can move things forward.
Right.
One of the biggest change was to eliminate the differential for coastal condos. And everyone was asking, are we a coastal condo? How do we measure for 3 miles from the coastline? What does the word coastline mean? So now we're not on that differential anymore. Everybody's on this 30-year schedule for the milestone inspections, but the bill does allow a local authority to determine that the inspection needs to be done earlier for various reasons. They have to have reasons for it. And of course, the deadline is still 12/31/24. So if you haven't started and you're on that schedule, then please start right now. But there's a little bit of a catch up before if the building reaches 30 after July 1, 22, but before 12/31/24, you have a little bit of a reprieve there. While an engineer or an architect has to be the lead person on the inspection team and prepare the actual report, it's recognized that it doesn't necessarily mean that the engineer has to do every single inspection that's required for the report. You know, there's a team of professionals. And for the structural integrity reserve studies, this was really important. Open up the field so that now additional professionals can prepare those reserve studies. You could be what's called a reserve specialist, which is a designation through CAI, or a PRA, professional reserve analyst, which is a designation from the Association of Professional Reserve Advisors. So opening up that field to more than just a licensed structural engineer really makes it easier for the associations to get these reports done on a timely basis.
And on the milestone, Lisa, I mean, that was just, we just followed what their normal course of business is that they do, you know, in any normal construction project. You know, it's the engineer architect under responsible charge. Responsible charge is kind of the term of art that they use for their license, so that, yeah, they can send some, you know, the actual PE doesn't have to go and do it all. You know, Mr. Smith of Smith Engineering isn't the one that goes out on every site. You know, he could send someone else. It's just, it's under his seal, his, you know, his license, his signature, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this was one of the most important changes made. I mean, we're already going to be struggling to get the structural integrity reserve studies done. So opening up that field to the people who actually do them and
Right.
have done them for 15, 20 years made a lot of sense. As a manager, I can tell you we struggled to get engineers who were, one, interested in doing the work, and two, available. I mean, the men and women that are doing engineering right now are extremely busy with everything else, including the milestone and other things. So opening it up to the people who really know what they're doing made a lot of sense. And it puts us in line with, you know, what the rest of the country is doing. You know, we were well behind the curve on getting reserve studies done. So I think this is getting us to that point and getting our associations to finally actually do them. And now the education of understanding them is where we're at. But I think this is a huge improvement for our industry, for sure.
Right. I mean, before this, there were 11 states that required reserve studies. And, you know, we're the first one that has this structural integrity type reserve study, but required, you know, which I think is something that you should be doing every 3 to 5 years. And then we're now the first one. The other thing is, I just want to, last thing on that milestone, Lisa, you know, the changes that we made, you know, getting rid of the 3 miles from the coast thing, expanding the scope of who can do them, and then also allowing for flexibility with local government, where if you've shown that you know, have a contract, that you're, and so say you get your contract in place and the engineer or the architect says, I'm not gonna be able to get out there until, you know, February of 2025. As long as you've shown that you're starting that process and you're not ignoring it, you know, they're not going to say, oh, well, we're not going to give you 60 days to get it done. The local government can expand on that, or can give you the more time. And then also, and especially with Miami, you guys really, you know, after Surfside jumped in and started doing a lot of things ahead of time. And that's very important. And then now we're getting asked, well, what if we already did it? Do we have to do it again? No, there's now that look back time where you can provide that to local government, and they can say, you know, if it substantially meets what a you know, a phase 1 visual milestone inspection would be, there's like a 5-year look back. They can say, all right, we can use this will work. You're done. But just to keep in mind that they're going to use the date that you got that one done as now the starting date for your 10 years for when your next one is due. So if you're using something that you did in 2022, fine, but now your next one's going to be due in 2032, not later. So anyway, just wanted to mention those things on milestone before we move on.
Oh, no, that's really important because a lot of associations now, especially in Miami-Dade and Broward, where Southeast Florida concentrates Miami-Dade, Broward, and Monroe counties, and we had the 40-year recertification building safety inspection program. So the buildings, the associations are already paying engineers to undertake those analyses, and do you have to pay all over again in order to fill out a different set of forms? Now, there may be different set of forms. The Florida Building Commission is going to promulgate forms for use for these milestone inspections, but as long as the inspection itself encompasses all of the safety or the structural safety issues of the building, then we're hoping that those reports can be pretty much interchangeable, if not just modified, slightly for the purposes of the state report. And we're going to talk about that later. As far as the reserves are concerned, there's a question about the $10,000. That $10,000 has not changed. It's been in there since 1992. But let me clarify for everybody what the story is with reserves and reserve funding. Now, the 2-story condos and co-ops, you're not 3 stories, so you're not required to do a structural integrity reserve studies. So you're allowed to continue to vote to waive or repurpose reserves even after 12/31/24, but the vote is changed. The vote was always a majority of the quorum participating in the meeting. Now the vote to do so is a majority of the entire membership. So, and you're still required, and you've always been required, to include reserves, full funding of reserves for painting, paving, resurfacing, painting, roofing, and painting, paving, and roofing, and any item that exceeds $10,000. So I'm hoping that even the 2-story condos and co-ops go out and get a reserve study so that when they're preparing their budgets on an annual basis, that they can have legitimate numbers for disclosure purposes. I mean, you as a board member, community leader, you as a CAM, obviously, and you as a homeowner want to know or should want to know what expenses are coming down the pike. Even if you vote to waive them, you're doing so in an intelligent and a knowing way. For the buildings for the communities that are required to have the structural integrity reserve studies, you cannot waive anything that's on the SERS component list. Now, you can still waive your reserves for, I don't know, your tennis court or your bocce ball or some of your, interior lobby redecorating. But again, of course, the vote is majority of the entire membership. And there was a question here about the windows. The law has been changed to clarify the association only reserves for the components for which it bears responsibility. So if in your condo or co-op, the windows are maintained by the individual owners, then those windows are not going to be included in your reserve study. Those particular windows are not going to be included in your reserve funding. We talked about some of the components that are on there. It no longer includes the floor or foundation, but it's really structural elements. Now, for funding purposes, if you can rely upon your reserve professional. If the reserve professional does not anticipate any expenditures for, let's just say, the floor or the foundation, well, those can be excluded from the report, particularly if they have a component with excess of 25 years remaining useful life. However, if the reserve professional says, hey, listen, you're going to have to put some money into maintenance, repair of these items, so you'll include that in the report rather than a replacement cost for those reports. Notices to owners. Okay, there's a question here. What's the deadline for repurposing reserve? So we talked about, I didn't talk about it, it was on the slide. you're still allowed to do a pool of reserves. So if you're if you're an association that has 3-story taller buildings, well, you have your mandatory reserves that have to be funded no matter what. And then you have all your other reserves that the members can vote to waive. So how do you pool them? If you put them all together, aren't you violating the portion of the statute that prohibits you from voting to waive the funding for the required reserves? Most reserve professionals and most attorneys are recommending that you put you make 2 different categories. So you have 2 different pools. One's your mandatory pool with all the SERS components. One's your non-mandatory pool. If you do that early, then you can figure out what money you have now, where you're going to be devoting most of your money, and then you can make strategic decisions as to whether or not you want to move money now, because you only have until 12/31/24 to move any money around if you're talking about reserves. And that includes breaking it up into 2 different pools.
Yeah.
So if right now you have a pooled reserve and it has everything in there that's under the sun, well, you can't just put all of that money into the structural integrity. I mean, that money was collected for everything that's in your pool. If you want to dedicate that money to the mandatory side, you have to do that vote now. Remember, that vote is the majority of the membership.
Yeah, and Lisa, just on a bigger picture, real quick, especially for this chapter, and 2 days ago we memorialized the 2-year anniversary of this tragedy. And this was the 3rd worst building collapse in the history of the United States. There was 9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing, and Surfside. The other 2 were caused by external forces. This was the worst building disaster that just literally was a collapse. You cannot have 98 people die in their sleep at 1:22 in the morning and not expect that there's going to be a response. And there is going to be a day of reckoning, or pain, whatever. I mean, it's coming, especially if you've been waiving, if your community has been waiving your reserves for 20 years. A lot of times, in a lot of cases, a lot of condos were being treated like apartments, hotels. This is an investment property. I'm not even there. I'm just and just waiving systematically, not maintaining these buildings, aging or otherwise, but we have a lot of inventory that's aging. So that's the first thing. Long story about how 4D came into being. Clearly and that was last year, passed last May, was signed by the governor, and clearly it did not work. And we knew that it was not going to work because they didn't either take the Senate approach, which was just the building inspection stuff, or the House approach, which was, hey, this happened in Miami-Dade County. We're actually the only one of 2 counties where we have an inspection program, and it still happened. So it's not inspections, it's maintenance. And then they stitched this thing together in a non-workable way. And we said it's good to put people on notice, but we need time for Condo World to fix this. So that's where we also were given 2 intervening sessions. So the 2023 session that we just had that ended in May to work on this, and then now moving into the season for the 2024 session. So in this area of just this reserve issue, things like floors, foundations, those were taken out because you're not going to be replacing your foundation. You're not reserving to replace your foundation like you do on items that are replaceable, like a roof. If you're replacing your foundation, your building is gone and you have a problem that's greater than just your foundation. So that was out. Then we looked at, there's certain things that are the responsibility of the unit owners. An association should not be maintaining reserves to replace something that they're not responsible for. So things like windows and doors. We made this caveat for the whole list, but it applies, I'm going to use windows and doors as an example, that, hey, it's in this list, but oh, by the way, you don't have to do it if your documents say, or you don't have to be reserving for it if your documents say they're the responsibility of the unit owners. These other structural items are, let's look at it like a column in a parking garage. That column is supposed to be there for more than 25 years. So if it has a useful life, that it's going to be there for more than 25 years, or it's indeterminate. Like you just, it's supposed to be there forever. So it's going to be 50 years. So if it's that type of a structural item, you're not replacing it. You don't have to be reserving these, oh my God, we're going to have to reserve millions and billions of dollars to replace every column. No, you're not replacing those columns. You don't have to reserve to replace them. You have to reserve to maintain them. Yes, on occasion, you might need, you probably will need concrete restoration work on that column, but you're not replacing it. So you don't think in terms of we're replacing that like you are the roof item. Things even like plumbing and electrical. If you've gotten rid of all your galvanized pipes, on your plumbing, that plumbing system, when your professional reserve study person comes in, you're not going to replace that plumbing. It might be, it's up to code. It's going to be great. You got to maintain it. So those level of expenses are not what I think a lot of associations are thinking. Same with electrical. These electrical systems, if you've gotten rid of all, you've got all copper wiring now, you're just replacing and you're maintaining, not replacing this entire system, And then the other thing to keep in mind is just there's a difference between fully funding and fully funded. If you've got this roof that you've 10 years, let's just use easy math, 10 years, it's going to be $100,000. You're calculating a 3.5% inflation, whatever, which I think we'll probably end up settling it down into. I think that's what we're going to live with. You can say, all right, I need to be putting, a little bit more than $10,000 away every year for 10 years to get there. So if your budget, you get into 2026 budget and you've got that, then you're good. So there's this thought of, oh my God, we have to have all of this money in the bank by December 31st, 2024. No, you still can use the pooling method, but as Lisa said, you're going to want to set up, I think, again, your reserve study specialist is going to walk you through this, but I think you're probably going to want to do 2 pots, because you're going to have those structural items, can move the stuff around there in that pool. But what the legislature clearly does not want to happen, and what was happening and is happening, is people using structural money that should be spent on fixing structural items. They're like, you know what? We've got a couple more years on our roof, on our waterproofing, whatever. We're going to use this for lobby and to retile the lobby. No, you cannot use money from that structural pool and move it over into the non-structural pool. That other pool, by the way, those you can waive. You're going to be able to waive those with a majority vote of the unit owners after 2025, after December 31st, 2024. So starting in 2025, you can still waive that with a majority vote of unit owners. But you can also move those items, that money. You can move, if you could say, oh my God, we need money now for a structural item. You can take money from the non-structural pool and move it over. You just can't take it from the structural pool and move it that way. So it's those kinds of things that I think need to, and we're all stepping through this together. So no questions are dumb, no assumptions are, because this is brand new. This is brand new for the entire world. I mean, we're all learning on this together as we kind of step through this, how this thing is going to work. But I just want everybody to be cognizant of the fact that do not treat this like the sprinkler retrofit thing that has kept getting kicked down the can kicking down the road for 20 years, because that's not happening. This is something that's here to stay. We can work with it like we did this year, make a lot of really good changes. We can continue that next year. I think a big focus next year. And by the way, there's going to be a town hall meeting with the 2 sponsors of this, Senator Bradley and Representative Lopez in Miami on July 17th, 6 p.m. In the Edgewater area, I think. But the next, I think a big part of the next focus is going to be on the financing of this. All right, everybody believes we should have safe buildings, but now how do we pay for it? So now I will shut up and go back to
Hey,
answering.
you know what? That's a perfect segue, actually, because for everyone's edification, the bill that we were talking about on the federal level, Jason posted a link to it in the chat, not in the Q&A, but in the chat. So if you can go bookmark that so that you can check it out a little bit later. But federal law, I mean, nothing happens very quickly on the federal level. So, I mean, as you out there that are looking at having to fund, your monthly payment is now going to be dramatically increased. I can't, tell you that you can rely upon any of these laws because, nothing happens on the federal level all that quickly. But there was a question here, hey, if we have to fund what's in the structural integrity reserve study, and that's going to represent a huge increase in our budget, do we still have to do it? The answer is yes. So how can you kind of hedge against that? There's a couple things you can do. Now, if your structural integrity reserve study says the roof is due in 2 years, so then you're funding 50% in year 1 and 50% in year 2, my recommendation is get that roof done now. So then when the mandatory reserves kicks in, you're going to have 20 years to fund that particular item. So anything that you can get done now before the mandatory funding kicks in is going to lessen the burden on the owners on a monthly or quarterly basis. And that's especially true if you can get financing from a financial institution to pay for the immediate repairs. Another item that I wanted to mention was, excuse me, I just lost my train of thought. But again, that hit could be significant. So you are allowed to waive up until 12/31/24. So you have this year's budget, 2023. You can waive, and then this is 2023. If you vote now for the 2024 budget, you can waive or partially waive. And then if you vote in October, November of 24 on the 25 budget, you could actually reduce or waive for the 25 budget. So under the absolute drop dead deadline, by 2026, you're going to be funding those mandatory reserves. So you do have a good almost 2 years to get your ducks in a row to make sure that you're in a best financial position that you can. Now, there are a ton of lenders out there that will lend to community associations, and depending on the scope of work, you can spread a payment. You could spread the load out over 10 years, 20 years. I didn't think it was possible for longer than 20 years, but I've just saw one that now the bank is agreeing to a 30-year payout. It's a very significant loan, several millions of dollars. But the point being is that there are commercial financing options available to those associations that qualify. That's the big caveat, those associations that qualify. Miami-Dade had a wonderful program. I mean, the funds were swooped up like immediately after it was announced. So maybe one of these federal laws that gives additional funds or makes pools of funds available to local governments will be implemented by, if that actually becomes law, then maybe the local governments will start offering some types of similar programs. So, and then we'll move forward. But the question is, there's another question about members, owners not going to waive reserves. So I just want to clarify, going back again, if you're in a 1-floor or 2-story condo, you're entitled to waive any reserve funding, whether it's the mandatory structural reserves, whether it's the paving, roofing, paving, or any of the other items for which the association bears responsibility. You're going to be able to continue to do that. For the buildings that are 3 stories or higher, communities that are 3 stories or higher, you will not be able to waive reserve funding for any of the items that are in the structural integrity reserve study. And Travis talked about it. Those are your columns, those are your outside walls, those are any of your structural members. Now, milestone is due by 30 years. that's way too long to wait to have an engineering evaluation of your structural systems. I mean, you can't wait 30 years to start maintaining concrete or guarding against concrete spalling, particularly those that are on the coast, but everyone. I mean, you can be like white on rice when it comes to your 7-year schedule for your painting, but that doesn't mean that you're preventing every drop of water from entering into the concrete and causing to the deterioration of the concrete or rusting of the rebar. So 30 years is the milestone report. That's what you're required to do, absolutely required to do. But for those communities out there that are 10, 15 years old, you may want to wait until after 12/24 because of the limited availability of engineers right now. But immediately thereafter, think about, you need somebody to come to evaluate whether or not there are any preventative maintenance items that you can take on or any corrective maintenance that you can do now. Because if you attend to the corrective maintenance early, which is like voting in Chicago, early and often, then you're going to be saving yourself money in the long run. Travis, I know you wanted to speak to that.
This is what I push with my
No.
clients all the time, and Lisa, it's a big deal. If you're not doing your preventative maintenance, it only becomes exponentially worse, right? What costs $1 today costs $300 next week. So getting ahead of it is very important. We see this concept sometimes. We've had a 40-year recertification in Dade County, Dade and Broward, and people say, "Wait, I'll wait till the 40 to do things." But they're missing the point, right? The point of the 40, the point of this 30-year inspection is that's the latest that we ever want to go. What we really want to see is good preventative maintenance going on every year, every 3 years, every 5 years on a schedule, right? Because we want to make sure that our buildings are properly maintained and maintained at the right price. Again, if we fix an ounce of prevention, a pound of cure, all that kind of all those idioms that are out there, they're real. And everything goes up in cost exponentially. So get your inspections done, get your engineers to do a preliminary inspection. That's not going to cost you anywhere near what a 40-year recertification or 30-year recertification would cost you. But to have them go walk the building and put eyes on it is invaluable in the long run. You're talking about community and what it's going to take to take care of it. So.
Definitely. And I participated on the task force. CIA had a national task force that we dealt with building maintenance issues and reserve funding issues. Several of the engineers did a survey of laws throughout not only the United States, but they went on an international basis and looked at, protocols from Singapore and Canada and all over the world. And there were actually studies done to say that if you defer maintenance, especially when it comes to concrete restoration, rebar, any of the structural type work that's involved, it doesn't just go up 2 times or 3 times. There's a 10-time factor increase in the amount of money that you'll spend. So by failing to just attend to like one tiny little spot of rust that you can see on a wall, well, you don't know what's happening underneath there. If you can just attend to the spot as soon as you see it, then you're limiting the amount of repair that will need to be done immediately, and that will lessen the amount of repairs that will need to be done when you actually attend to the repairs. It's a very, very good point. Okay, so notices. I'm trying to watch the questions, but you guys are coming in pretty quick. So the notices, now this required. So if you're a community leader, you get the notice from the building department that you need to get that milestone within 14 days of receipt. You got to get it out to your members and tell them when your report is due. Then once you have the report prepared, you have to mail out or distribute the inspector prepared summary at least within 45 days of receipt of the inspector prepared summary. You also put that, that's also sent to the building department. And of course you post it on your website. If you have a website, you post the full report on the website. So there are time considerations for this work to get done. And we already talked about this, that the association is only responsible to reserve for the building components that it maintains. Travis talked about this already. So this is the look back period. And this, I know this may be tweaked a little bit further, particularly once the building commission creates the specific protocols for these milestone inspections. But suffice it to say that, thank goodness, if you've done it in 21, you don't have to do the whole thing over in 24 or by the end of 24. And the engineer that you worked with in 21 and 22 should have a familiarity with the building, particularly if you did major repairs after 21 or 22, that they were supervised the repairs, so they'll have a much better handle on what the needs of your building. For the multi-use buildings out there, again, the most important thing is that you have to reserve and you have to have the milestone and pay for the milestone for the portions of the building that you maintain. Now, it remains to be seen if you have a building that's multi-use where there's a retail component, maybe a hotel component, maybe, the condo component. It remains to be seen how the logistics of how you go about commissioning the report or hiring the engineer to prepare the report, but I think that's much lesser of a problem than it is, or the notion that you as a condo where your only portion of the building would have to pay for a report for the entire structure.
Lisa, we
outside.
wanted to make it very clear. It was, Representative Lopez from Miami was very concerned about the fact that she's like, what if there's a building with some retail at the bottom, you got the hotel, and then you only have, maybe a few condos that are in there at the top. Do those condos now have to pay, because that's, the residential portion of that? Do they have to now pay for the entire thing? And no, it's now can be, divided up, because obviously that hotel and the retail, they're all part of that building's envelope. And so that was a big concern for her, to make sure that that's all properly done. So your association attorney will now be able to help walk you through how that's going to work if you have a mixed use building.
Right. So we do have some other questions. We didn't talk about disclosures. There are disclosures that are required. So there are developer disclosures, just like the box of other developer disclosures when you're buying a brand new product that's a brand new building. There's also non-developer disclosures. Now, these disclosures are really in connection with the sale. So the seller the onus is on the seller to actually give the buyer the disclosure. But I know that, more likely than not, that they'll be coming to the association to ask for copies of these reports or copies of the structural integrity reserve studies. So you have, as management out there, now's the time to think about how you want to plan for that. How can you make your life easier when it comes to all these requests that may be coming in, daily basis?
Yeah, this is definitely something that's expanded our scope of work, among other things, in the association field. So you want to make sure you have all this stuff together and ready to be put out. If you're using a digital platform, it's fairly easy. If you're going more old school, you just got to have everything ready to put together. But there's a lot of great digital platforms out there to do it on, to make the managers' lives easy, or the self-managed communities' lives easier as well.
Yeah, definitely. So what, I forget, what are we on time? Do we have like 15 more minutes?
We have plenty of time. I think we
Oh,
have
we have
until
plenty of
4
time.
o'clock. So
Okay, good. For some reason, I thought it was an hour and a half. So tell us what you think. So please scan this. We're going to send out, there's a lot of questions. Can we get the slides? Yes, of course. We're going to send out a copy of the slides from CAI. We'll also send a survey for you to take. But one of the questions on the survey is, let us know what you as community leaders, community managers, community residents really feel is important. What can we do? Or, let's have your voice heard as well. And two other things I want to mention before we go direct to questions. Hey, if you're not a CIA member, thank you for participating. If you are a CIA member, thank you for being a CIA member, and please get involved. We love, love everybody to get involved. The bigger the voice, the better. We have a very, very active chapter here in Southeast Florida, where the events, monthly events, social events, education events, and the like. So there's a whole lot going on here in Southeast Florida. But for those of you that are not signed up on the Advocacy Center, here's where you'll get your action alert. So if you can go right to the Advocacy Center on the CAIonline.org website, click and then enter your email address, so that when there is an issue that is applicable to your area or to the state of Florida, then you'll be notified and you'll have the ability to participate. So, and here's our resources. So there's a website, right? The CAIonline.org website, the social media. I'll tell you, the folks on the national basis do a great job when it comes to the blog. They talk about things not only for national issues, but they also talk about state issues. And then there's information on Twitter. So if you follow CI Advocacy on Twitter, you would know about that Wasserman Schultz bill that was recently filed. And then, of course, there's all kinds of other social media opportunities. I think that's the bulk of our presentation. So let's go back to the questions. Now, there was a couple of questions on
something, Lisa.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jason.
And unfortunately, they just started doing construction behind me, so I'll be quick. I think my biggest takeaways from this legislative session were that this isn't going away. Right. I think a lot of associations were waiting to move forward with the reserve study or the milestone inspection to see that it was going to get changed. As Travis said, like the sprinkler issue that kept getting moved. This isn't getting moved. Right. We as the people who do lead these communities in our different roles need to make sure that that message is getting out there. They can't wait. They need to get in line. There's only so many professionals, even with the expansion, that can do this work. And so you need to make sure that you're taking it seriously and getting in line. I think the other thing that was a big takeaway was, this advocacy stuff really works, right? This is my first year participating, Michael's first year participating, and he and I have talked about it a bunch. And, being involved in the process, be it from the emails that Lisa was mentioning a minute ago, where you just sign up as an advocate and you put the message out when it's called for, to things like going to Tallahassee, like we all did. It really does make a difference. I mean, just in that crazy HOA bill that we talked about earlier, that went from something that was out of control to manageable. There are a number of things that were changed in all of the other bills. So for those of you that are not involved, even on just an email basis, it's really worth it. It's not hard to do, and it really makes a difference. It makes all the work that Travis does up there easier if he's got some support in the background to say, look, here's the 500 people that agree with what I'm saying. I'm not just standing here by myself.
Right. Absolutely.
That's a very good point. Travis, you want to answer that,
Yeah.
or Michael?
No, I'm trying to find this list. But anyway, I put the link. The list I sent, somebody had asked about the list of structural items, that G list, and when I copied and pasted it, it did not copy and paste the strike through and the additions. So I just put the link now in there. If you go to that, just go down to line, it starts on line. The G starts on line, or the structural integrity reserve study on 712. But if you go to 720, that's where the list is, and you'll see that it's struck. Now that it's signed by the governor, it'll become a chapter law. And so now when they reprint, they republish the statutes soon, all that stricken and line, that'll all be out, and it'll just be what you need. But anyway, you can see it there where floor and foundation is out. Yes, to Jason's point, Michael's point, it is vitally important to be engaged and involved. I'm there all the time. They're used to seeing me. it doesn't make nearly the impact as when people from that district, from that area come in, especially if you're from the, their constituent. But I mean, literally, and I'll use as an example, we were dealing with like vacation rentals, and we weren't getting where we needed to get this a couple of years ago to get that language that Lisa mentioned put in there regarding associations. So we brought up this guy, that we all know, that this guy, the condo president from Palm Beach, and he literally just showed up in his, his shorts and golf shirt. And he was just, basically pissed off that he had to, not play pickleball. And he was there, like, I cannot believe I'm having to deal with you idiots. I got a pickleball match. I'd signed up for the court. And like, all of a sudden it just, they pay attention because they all have this guy in their district, this guy, this gal, that's that condo, that association person. And they know, that this is the person that's going to go back and talk to all of their residents about how receptive or not receptive. So it is very important when we send out these alerts. We're trying to do a better job because things move so quickly, doing a better job of sending out the alerts that Jason mentioned. But I will then walk the halls and they'll be like, oh my God, you've got to tell them to stop. I mean, I'm getting thousands of emails, and I'm like, really? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, and literally I will go out into the hall and call back to the Jasons and Michaels and say, you guys, keep it up, send more. Because if they're telling me that it's bothering, that they're getting it, we want to double down on that. So it's very important. So thank you for being not just a part of this, a puzzle piece, but a very important part of this.
Well, yeah, thank you for all your effort. I'll tell you, he says that things move quickly. Things move very, very quickly. We can have a discussion via text message at 6:30, and then by 8:30, everything is different. Everything is different. So it does move really, really quickly. Few clarifications. So that 360 that I talked about, the statute of limitations for construction defects, that applies to all types of properties, not just community associations, not just condos, but it applies if you're going to be building a commercial building or what have you. So those statute of limitations are now modified for everyone. But there was a couple of questions about 919 and the notices and the enforcement process. So it remains to be seen. Right now, the HOA, right now that law is in effect. So HOA notices need to be posted in a conspicuous place on the property. Pretty much what I've seen is that means at the entrance. So if you have a controlled entrance or you only have one or two entrances to the property, there's typically either a sign or an open, an item that you can open where somebody can place a sign says, and in the past it always said board meeting 6:30 at Clubhouse or board meeting 7:30, what have you. Now that you do have to post an agenda, the question is, and I really can't answer it that well, but if the notice is posted besides the sign on the lawn, it's posted at the clubhouse in the pool area, does that count, or does it have to be posted on the lawn sign as well? Really, we're talking about the agenda now. Really, it just needs to be posted in a conspicuous place on the HOA property so that people can, know what the board meeting what will be discussed at the board meeting, so they can decide whether or not they want to participate. And another question talked about the enforcement issue from 919, and that's the fine. Now, the committee hearings are only required if you're going to levy a fine or vote to suspend the use rights for recreational facilities. Many of you may have enforcement committees that participate in various ways. And however you set up your enforcement committee as far as investigating the violation or providing a report to the board of the violation or making a recommendation to the board whether to pursue further action on the violation, that's separate and apart from the fining or suspension type committee. So the question here was, how can a violation go from the board directly to the attorney, directly to court or arbitration or what have you? And that's because there are no requirements for a committee to determine whether violations exist unless, or to determine whether a fine is appropriate or a suspension is appropriate, unless the board has levied a fine or imposed a suspension on use rights. So, so there's a question here about the reserve studies, where someone recently obtained a reserve study and they put all kinds of non-structural items in there. Now, reserve professionals are reserve professionals. There's been a reserve protocol in place for many years. So the reserve professionals operate under their professional guidelines. So when you do a reserve study, it's not only going to include the Sears components, the components that Travis mentioned a little bit earlier. It's going to include all of the components for which the association is responsible that cost in excess of $10,000 for deferred maintenance or to replace. And the question is whether you're going to fund every single thing on that whole list, or whether you're going to solely fund the mandatory items, or whether you're going to do some type of a hybrid type approach. So your reserve study is going to include the other items, your other components that you maintain that are on a life cycle. We're not going to expect the reserve professionals or engineers to change their standards for the reserve studies based upon Florida law. What they have done is they have changed their studies to incorporate the new Florida requirements, and will give you options or give you participate in strategic discussions so that for you to be able to determine what's best, what are the best funding mechanisms or protocols for your particular community. There's a question. I said floors and foundations are no longer in the SERS. They're not specifically listed in the SERS, but all structural members are listed in the SERS. So the floors and foundations are line items that have been taken out. It says that they were showing in what I posted. I'm not that if so, then that is just an omission on my part. Travis, you want to announce your email address?
Yes, I put it in the thing. It is Travis at Moore, MOORE-relations.com.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And wait, this is stricken items. Oh, there any clarification on the date changes for the SERS? I talked about that right when we first began. So if your building was age 30, I'm sorry, it's 10 years. No, if your building is over 10 years old, then you have to have the first SERS by 12/31/24. The report is not necessarily tied to your budget. So you're still allowed to waive in 24 for your 25 budget. So if you have your report done in August of 24 and it shows all the reserves that you're required to fund, or all the reserves that are included in the schedule, some on the mandatory side, some on the non-mandatory side, then that all has to be in the budget that's adopted by the board. Remember, the board is responsible to adopt a budget containing the fully funded reserve schedule. The question is up to the board then what it wants to ask the members to vote on, and that vote has to be taken before 12/31/24 for it to apply to the 1/1/25 budget year. And insurance. Okay, so we did deal with insurance this year. There's been many efforts on the part of the legislature to deal with the insurance crisis in Florida. Many of that is technical, where there was additional funding available to carriers for the secondary, what is it called there, Travis, when underwriting, for the underwriting purposes.
What? Say that again.
Insurance, the 2D
reinsurance market.
Right, the reinsurance market. I'm sorry. So
Okay,
yes,
yeah.
so there is now additional funding available for reinsurance to admitted carriers. Now, not all of us are using admitted carriers because we have very few admitted carriers here in the state of Florida. So they have to start doing additional things. This year, this 2023 session, and actually from the special session from 2022, they did make some improvements that people think they are going to, or that are going to help, like eliminated the assignment of benefits and otherwise put some constraints upon policyholder claims. There's also now a insurance not called a Bill of Rights, Insurance Accountability Act, where insurers, carriers have to report certain financial disclosures to the state. But this is an ongoing issue because our insurance costs are just outrageous.
Yeah,
I
and
think
this-
everybody will agree to that.
Yeah, this will be, if not the highest, and it was really going to be our highest priority prior to, because we saw this, this was developing prior to the Surfside. But this will be the highest priority. I can only imagine going forward. So certainly, and we're going to be relying on all of you to be helping us tell this story of what's happening, especially in this commercial residential market. I mean, it's just Citizens is kind of it if you want to be in the the admitted carrier market, not the surplus lines. So Jason had shared in the chat a document, a link. So to definitely let us know what you think. Oh, and Lisa just put, or the slide it's there as well. So let us know so that we can make sure we're tracking with you, and we'll be meeting, I know, as a group July 29th in person for that day-long kind of planning session. So that's important to get that in by then.
So hopefully I've covered most of your questions and concerns. We did go over a lot today, so it's a lot to absorb. Obviously, I want to thank Michael. Both Michael and Jason are new to the Florida Legislative Alliance this year. Both have participated and gave a ton of input. This is my first year back joining the Florida Legislative Alliance. I've been participating on the federal level for several years, so I was very pleasantly surprised to see not only the number of participants, active participants and delegates, but the breadth, the range of experiences of our delegates. We have homeowner volunteer leaders. That's always crucial. Of course, community association managers, insurance professionals, an architect is now very active with our group. We have accountants, obviously, and the insurance professionals right now are relying upon to digest what's going on in the insurance world because it is complicated. So anything else? We will be sending out a copy of the slides, and we thank you for participating. We know it was a little bit of short notice, and please make sure that you scan the QR code so that you can send in your survey results. Any final concluding thoughts, guys?
No, just thank you.
No, I just
for taking the
thank you,
time.
Travis, for all the work you do up there. It makes a big difference, obviously.
Yes, it does.
I'm happy to be a part of a group of people who really care about what's going on in our industry. And then the last thing I said is, get ahead of it, guys. Get moving. Go to CAI's go to our local CAI website, find a reserve professional, call them today and get in the wait list because there's lots of work to do.
Well said.
Thank you everyone for your help and for putting this together.
And thanks for I mean, at some point I looked down there and there was like 100 and some people. So thank you for taking the time to show up, during a lunch hour and share with us, because it's a two-way operation here.
Good job.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye bye. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.